Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Albert Brooks.
Thank you. Hello, and congratulations on your purchase. This fine recording is a combination of material. Some recorded live at the Troubadour in Los Angeles, some recorded elsewhere. The last part of this album is called Comedy -1. And this is where you have the chance to become the comedian, or comedienne, and get the laughs. But more about that later. I would like to say that during the live portion of this record, no laughter has been altered in any way, shape, or form. As a matter of fact, I have with me here a notary public who will swear to this fact. You're a notary public.
Yes?
And you swear to this fact.
Sure.
Well, that's just about it. Oh, yes, when you hear the yodel, you turn the record over. So, without wasting any more time, let's go now to the Troubadour. Well, wait. Let's waste just a little more time. Fine. Let's go now to the Troubadour. Join me in progress.
We are, in essence, ambassadors from the Gringo Nation.
During the strip search, they found this grandma tar in my cooch. You like tar?
How's that for a topper? Wow, look at you. Back for more. Yeah, you like that. You know what? I envy you. I envy me. I envy all of us. Welcome back to a fresh episode of Doing It with Mike Sachs. Mike Sachs is me, and I am Mike Sachs. Let's get right to it. There is a lot. We're going to get straight to a new segment that I called Comedic Gems, and I'll be telling you about my love for someone or something that perhaps is not as appreciated in the comedy world today as much as I think it should be. And then on to another new segment, Short, Sharp Advice, in which I'll give you advice about something very specific when it comes to comedy writing based on all the interviews that I've done in the past and through my own experience. First up, Comedic Gems. And I'm leery about even implying in any way that this next person that I admire so much is forgotten, because she is not. She is beloved. She recently won a major award, the Patty Chayefsky Award, which is WGA West's highest TV writing honor. That is huge. And anyone who knows anything about comedy, really knows about comedy, knows about Merrill Markoe and the tremendous influence that she has had on generations of writers. So a little history. Merrill Markoe is a TV writer as well as an incredible humorist for the written page. And that's a very rare double combo, to be able to write for the page and the screen at the highest possible levels. Two totally different things, and she can pull it off. She's written numerous books of essays and fiction, including It's My Fucking Birthday, The Psycho X Game, Walking in Circles Before Lying Down, The Indignities of Being a Woman. Most recently, she wrote a book called We Saw Scenery, The Early Diaries of Merrill Markoe by Merrill Markoe. That's out by Algonquin Books, and I recommend that. It's a fantastic book. Also, a few essay collections, What the Dogs Have Taught Me, How to Be Happy Like Me, and Cool, Calm, and Contentious. I recommend them all. As a TV writer, Merrill wrote for the 1977 revival of Laugh-In that starred Robin Williams. She also wrote for the variety show Mary, starring Mary Tyler Moore, and co-starring two little-known performers named David Letterman and Michael Keaton. She also wrote for Newhart, Sex and the City, and Moonlighting. Not a bad lineup. Beyond that, Merrill will go down in comedic history for setting the tone of Late Night with David Letterman, and even before that, the early morning show that Letterman had on NBC from June to October 1980. Now, when I say that Merrill set the tone, I mean literally she set the tone. So many of Letterman's biggest and most popular bits, whether it was Stupid Pet Tricks, Stupid Human Tricks, viewer mail, that was all due to Merrill and Merrill alone. But it's the tone of any comedy show that matters, and right off the bat, a viewer could tell that this was an intelligent and sharp and mocking show while also being at times gloriously stupid and just plain wonderful. It was different than anything else that was on the air back then, and probably different than most of what's on the air today. Letterman himself has said that no one, no other writer, no other person was as responsible for the comedic tone of the show than Merrill Markoe, and that not a good joke was really written after she left. She was the producer and the head writer, and she eventually won 5 Emmy Awards. So Merrill, she was born in New York, raised in San Francisco. She was a huge fan of Robert Benchley and Dorothy Parker, as well as, she has told me, W.C. Fields for his, quote, word choices, which I love because that's all comedy is really, is word choices. She attended Berkeley and she received a master's and taught art for a while. She then performed stand-up in Los Angeles at the Comedy Store, where she became friends with ... Andy Kaufman. Also, she became friends with David Letterman, who soon began to appear on Carson's Tonight Show with a lot of the material written by Merrill. Now, here's one joke Merrill wrote for Letterman on his Carson appearance. Alpo dog food boasts that it contains all beef and not a speck of cereal. My dog spends his days going through the garbage and drinking out of the toilet. Something tells me he might not mind a speck of cereal. Not many people knew that Letterman had Markoe as a writer, but that material that he performed on Carson that really launched his career and his shows, a lot of it was penned by Markoe that she used to perform herself as a stand-up. No less than Norm Macdonald has talked about that specific joke and others that Dave told at the time, and how much it influenced him later with his own comedic style. The daytime talk show that Merrill and Letterman created in 1980 was a huge hit among a very certain subset of fans, very small crowd, but the show's humor overall did not translate to the early morning news crowd, which brings us to Late Night with David Letterman, the subsequent show at 12:30 a.m. on NBC. If you weren't around then, and I was very, very young, but I was around, it's hard to explain the impact this show had on comedy. It was revelatory. This is pre-internet, pre-cable, pre-everything. This show truly set the tone for the humor to come for at least a generation, if not more. I can assure you that every comedy writer that came of age in the 1980s was a huge fan of Letterman and of his sensibility, and that influence leaked out into their own work in the 90s and 2000s and beyond. And a lot of that, if not all of that, Merrill Markoe is responsible for. Merrill Markoe and the other show's writers, including Adam Resnick, my friend, Chris Elliott, Steve O'Donnell, Steve Young, Randy Cohen, George Meyer, the great George Meyer, they took the showbiz they grew up with and stuck it in a microwave and warped it to the extent that it became brand new. The genius of the show was to entertain in an old-fashioned sense, but with a current sensibility. The genius, too, of Merrill and the rest of the writers and Letterman was that they allowed for bizarreness. Speaking from a personal standpoint, the characters that Chris Elliott performed on this show set the tone for everything that I've done as a writer. I'll often play characters strange, sad, and pathetic on the page, very much like Chris did on the show. Everything I've done goes back to Late Night and Chris Elliott and Merrill Markoe, everything. In my mind, Merrill's career really took off after she left Late Night after 6 years to do her own writing, in which she had the total freedom to write what she wanted, how she wanted. I am a huge fan of her books, every single one of them, and I suggest that you go out now and you buy them. The style is so strong and so individual, you just can't teach this strength of style for the page. It's in her and it comes out flawlessly on the page, which is such a rare thing for a comedy writer. On another personal note, I am proud to say that Merrill and I are friends. I love her and I love her writing. And it astonishes me that Hollywood in particular isn't more aware of her amazing talents. Maybe it doesn't astonish me. The problem with Hollywood, as it is with publishing and other genres and mediums, is that the people in charge tend not to have our sensibility, meaning the good comedic sensibility, the right sensibility, the high humor IQs. And I'm not saying I have a huge humor IQ. I'm just saying that for the love of God, anything Merrill writes is better than 99% of what's being written out there. And my question is this: why is she not being inundated with opportunities? Well, I think I know the answer, and that has to do with misogyny and ageism and every other thing that Hollywood is so good with. Fuck them for not getting Merrill and not providing her and other amazing writers, female especially, older than 40, an opportunity to shine. It fucking infuriates me. I don't understand it. Anyway, check out Late Night Clips, read Merrill's books, all of them, and if you know of any producers out there, tell them to get off their fucking asses and let Merrill have some free reign to create genius. Thank you. Now, on to short, sharp advice. In this episode, I want to talk more about literary agents and if you really need one. I spoke about this last episode, and I got a lot of emails about this, and I want to be clear about this. If there's an agent out there who likes what you're doing as a writer and doesn't want to change you and wants to take the work that you want and put it out there as is, by all means, let him or her do that. My warning is, if someone contacts you and says, hey, I love that piece you wrote in McSweeney's, I love that piece you wrote for New Yorker, I love that piece you wrote on your own blog, but I think we should change it a bit and make it more towards YA readers, or more towards romance readers, or more towards this or that. Let's work together to hone out a new proposal and a new pitch. If someone says that, run away. Because in my experience, and in my friend's experience, you're going to work with this person for a year. You're going to produce a pitch and a book idea that wasn't in your original realm of creativity. And then you're going to have something you're not happy with. And then you're going to have something that probably won't sell anyway. What I'm saying is, in this day and age, for the first time in publishing history, you can put out a book the way you want to, design-wise, creativity-wise, marketing-wise. You can put it out next week if it's already ready. You don't have to wait 2 years to get an agent. You don't have to wait 3 years to have a publisher put it out. You can put it out immediately. And when it comes to comedy, I assure you that a lot of publishers do not have your sense of humor, and that would go for agents as well. So do the right thing, in my opinion. Put it out how you want to, do the best you can marketing it, and move down the road. The most important thing is not to stagnate. Do not run into someone at a party you haven't seen in 10 years and complain to them that you're still trying to sell your book idea. I can't really speak to scripts. I'm more of a writer for the written page. But I can tell you, having put out numerous books in the traditional sense through mainstream publishing, as well as putting out books in the new sense, self-publishing, I much prefer the latter. And when it comes to comedy, I think you will too. Now, if you're putting out an academic book on Henry Kissinger, I would have different advice. If you're putting out a book that is a comedy book that you want your friends and those in the comedy community to read, I suggest you do it yourself. And again, if you want to contact me with questions, I'm not asking for money, I'm not asking for anything. I'm just here, honestly, to help you, because the leap from A to B doesn't have to be as mysterious as you think it is. Write me at mikebsachs@gmail.com, and I'll write you back and give you any advice I can to help you get this made, because that's really what I do want out there. I want these books that I grew up reading and loving to be produced, to not be gummed up in the system, to not have someone being told, you can't do this. The fact of the matter is you can do this, and fuck anyone who says you can't do it. That's my own opinion. We have a lot to get to this episode, so we're going to go straight to this week's letter, which for some bizarre reason just arrived on the back of a prescription for Cialis made out to me by my own urologist, but with a signature that strangely looks like my wife's. Very mysterious. Not sure how that happened. And I hope these are just food stains. Letter number 1, and I always say letter number 1 like David Letterman did, even though I only have one letter. Dear Mike, have you ever gotten in touch with an old lover? And have you ever done so on the air, meaning did you record it? That's a great question. This is signed, Cheers, Travis Losos, Lewiston, Idaho. Lewiston, Idaho. I know no one in Idaho. I'm glad I have listeners in Idaho. Thank you, Travis, for that question. I like this question. So the answer is actually yes. About 2 years ago or so, I reached out to one of my first girlfriends, Jenny Cook, whom I went to junior high school and high school with back in Maryland, and I recorded the entire call. We had not spoken in many years, but I recorded the call, and I think in retrospect it went pretty well. And if you're interested, well, here it is.
Suburban Hospital, how may I direct your call?
Yeah, I'm trying to reach the brain doctor for kids section.
Excuse me?
Brain doctor for kids.
You mean pediatric neurology?
Sure.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Pediatric neurology?
Yes, I'd like to speak with Dr. Jennifer Cook, please.
She's on rounds. I can put you through to her answering service.
This is an emergency.
Regarding what?
Regarding a kid who has something wrong with her brain.
Are you a doctor?
Yes.
Hospital?
What?
What hospital?
General.
And your name?
Dr. Sachs.
And Dr. Cook will know what this pertains to?
Get her.
All right. I'll have Dr. Cook paged. Dr. Cook?
Jenny,
Hello?
it's Mike Sachs.
Mike Sachs?
From junior high school through high school.
You're a doctor now?
Yeah.
Where do you practice?
Actually, I work at a magazine. I'm a writer, and I have my own podcast.
Okay.
300 listeners, 200 downloads per week. I've been trying to reach you forever, and I thought this might be a good time. You don't seem to be getting back to me on your Earls.com account.
I got rid of that years ago.
Thanks for letting me know, man.
Right.
Can I have your new email, please?
What is this pertaining to? I was told this was a medical emergency.
Ooh, so formal. It is. God, I've been thinking about this for so long. Oh, man, where to begin? I
really need to get going.
Just hold on a second, okay? I was patient with you when your dad was dying.
What?
You don't remember your dad dying?
Of course I remember my dad dying. It's one of the reasons I became a doctor.
All right, well, I'll get to that later. Listen, I want to ask you about our first-class trip to Williamsburg, Virginia. We took 2, but I want to concentrate on the first one.
In 9th grade?
Yeah.
What about it?
That's when we first started going out.
We went out for like a month.
I know, but you were my first.
I guess you were my first too.
See? This is kind of historic.
Historic.
We kissed while we were wearing a tri-corner hats, and you pretended to be locked in the stake. We laughed.
Okay.
Also had a crush on you, but you chose me. And you later chose Mark. You later went out with him, but I'm curious to know why you chose me first.
I don't remember.
You do.
This really isn't the best time, Mike.
Oh, I think it is. In fact, I know it is.
I don't know. You were nice.
All right, what else? Was I cute?
I don't know, Mike. I'll give you my cell, and we can talk later, okay?
Remember when we broke up?
Yeah, I guess. We went out for a month.
I was really upset.
I'm sorry. But you broke up with me.
Now your memory kicks in? I didn't know what I was doing. It was a mistake. Do you never make mistakes? You're so perfect as a doctor.
Sure.
Do you ever think about me sometimes, in certain moments of romantic?
No.
I wrote you a poem. It's about a celestial bed that's stuffed with aphrodisiacs, fresh wheat, rose leaves, lavender, and hair from a stallion's tail. Because I remember that you really like fantasy.
What? What?
I wrote you another poem, too, and this one is funny. Can I say it?
I really need to get back to my patient, okay?
My thing ain't thick, but it certainly doesn't prick. Is that really why you left me, or was it because I spied on you from a tree? Looked right into your room to see you undressed. God, that whole thing was a mess.
Oh my God.
Back to the Future. Bet you now wish you could have been way cooler. I apologize 10 million times, and even once in rhyme. Jen, can I email you? I just need your email. I want to send you the poem, and I want to send you some other things.
You know, I really need to get back.
I need your email.
I really do have to head back.
What's so vital that I can't wait?
A malignant tumor near the pituitary gland.
What?
A brain tumor.
So one of the reasons that I'm calling is that I've been spending a lot of time in recent months attempting to find my inner amazing, my inner awesome. And one of the ways I can do this is to get close to the people who've meant a lot to me over the years.
I really need to get back.
You will listen, just like I used to listen to you complain about your migraines.
Yeah, I feel one coming on.
Can I tell you a secret?
Sure.
I hate lifeguards.
Okay.
Want to know why?
Why?
Because you went out with one for years and years at Virginia Beach. I also hate female weathermen. You want to know why?
Sure.
That one's a secret.
I really do need to get back. I think you might need some help.
Oh, you think so, Doctor? Do you know that I have my own podcast now, that you're now on it?
Yeah. You told me earlier. Jennifer.
Jen, I'm getting a divorce.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Are you?
This child might die if I don't get back right now.
You're on a live podcast right now. Him or me?
It's her.
Or me.
Hello?
Jen, I need your mental help real bad.
What's wrong?
I just stubbed my toe with a plastic swizzle stick. It had a flamingo on the top.
Are you drunk?
And that's your business why?
Woo! So that went well. Thank you, Jenny, for participating in that call. For our interview this episode, we have a fresh one, and it's with a director and writer whose work I truly love. We were talking earlier about Merrill Markoe and David Letterman and Chris Elliott, and that sense of controlled madness and not giving a shit that's so clearly evident. Well, that is also evident in this man's work. Writer-director Matthew Johnson, who was out of one of my all-time favorite cities, Toronto. And he's one of those guys who you can just tell knows everything about comedy and pop culture and what matters. Matthew has put out a few movies, including BlackBerry, which came out earlier this year, and it's about the history behind the BlackBerry, the device that changed the world until it didn't. He is a writer and director who is never condescending to his characters or his situations in his films that others might be. He's one of my favorites making movies right now, and I recommend checking out all of his work, including the absolutely hilarious TV show called Nirvana, The Band, The Show. Let's go to that interview with Matthew Johnson now. All right, so I was rewatching Operation Avalanche this morning, and it occurred to me, even more so than when I first watched it a while back, just how accurately this style and this sensibility and your themes represent the times that we live in. You know, what's real, what's not real, what are we watching, and through how many layers. What is it about this style that you're tethering your stories to a fake authenticity that you like as a creator and as a filmmaker?
I wonder if it's like that feeling of like the naughty thrill that I would have as a kid, where I would be watching something. Typically it would be something that my friends made, because I grew up sort of like early days of home video. And I'll never forget, my friend Ben Paler had made a video for a French project in Miss Branov's class in grade 7, I think. And in it, there was like a video trick where he did that trick where, like, you know, you're holding something in your hand and then it cuts and now this is something else in your hand. And it like a pencil had turned into a gun or something. And I found this so deliciously naughty for some reason that I cannot explain. And I was like, oh, I want to do that. Like, I want to give people that same feeling. And then that kept evolving. And instead of going into like a VFX, like a typical movie space, I think because I was getting so into documentaries when I was young, I just got obsessed with showing people things that I thought they would think was real, and using that as a way to fool them in a very, very superficial way. And that's as a kid. I loved fooling people, and I loved telling lies with a straight face. That's another thing I became addicted to at a young age, where the audience is put in a position where they go, well, I know this can't be real, but all of the markers, all of my senses are telling me that it is. And there's just something, I've said this before, but it's a lot like watching live magic in a way, where you get to watch the trick and you're like, oh, kind of dazzled by the story of the trick. But at the same time, you're unpacking how this trick was done, if you're really watching. And so you get to watch the thing twice. And for some reason, that extra layer of it appeals to the little kid in me, that same kid who's like, oh, I'm going to fool some people. I'm going to trick some people. And I find that very motivating.
That's really interesting. I mean, comedy and magic are very closely related. And I think, as having grown up a fan of comedy and magic, you want to be fooled. You want to believe that it's real, whether it's a magic trick or Andy Kaufman getting up there, even though you know that he's faking the wrestling moves. For some reason, as a viewer, it hits you harder.
Yeah.
And you think about it more, and it becomes deeper with more layers.
Well, Kaufman was a huge, I don't think it doesn't even require me saying it, but it was a huge reference for me when I started learning what comedians had done. I was a pretty sheltered kid in a lot of ways. I was not who's the guy in Freaks and Geeks who comes home and watches Steve Martin, Martin Starr? That wasn't me. I was not allowed to watch Eddie Murphy's Delirious. I just didn't know what these things were. I had no idea who comedians were until I was in my 20s, really, as crazy as that sounds. So I learning who Andy Kaufman was and even getting to see his work. I think the first time I even heard the name was probably in Man on the Moon, if I'm being honest. I think as a young person, I probably thought that Jim Carrey was Andy Kaufman. And so in some ways, I think that was kind of a gift, because I then got to see all the stuff that he'd done in a much more, in a lenticular way. It's like I was looking at it through the lens of, oh, this is all done, and now I get to look at him as a filmmaker. I think in a way that a lot of people sort of in France were discovering Jerry Lewis, which I think is absurd, by the way, that they think he's some kind of genius. But that same kind of thing where they view him not, I got to view him not as a comedian who would go on and do silly things and be like, oh yeah, this guy's funny, but I was viewing him as more of an artist as an adult. I didn't find him particularly funny, but thought what he was doing was so interesting. And I think that had a big effect on how I was approaching filmmaking, but not in a comedy way, Because again, I know it's anathema, but I didn't find him funny. I found him to be a serious artist. I loved it.
But what's interesting is, as a kid and not being familiar with his style, you sort of adopted it and came to it innately. Whereas a 5th, 6th, 7th grader, you would say things in a serious manner where you knew you were kidding, but perhaps your friends or the teachers didn't know you were kidding.
Right, which is so Kaufman. And I think that it's because there is an archetype of the jester or the liar or whatever that character is, whatever that Jungian archetype is, that will inhabit all kinds of different people. And I'm not trying to say, like Carrie says in that documentary, that it's the spirit of Andy Kaufman's in me. I don't know enough about the guy, but I think there is an animating principle behind a certain style of comedian. Fielder is certainly there. Tim Heidecker is certainly in the same place of being how can I there's a really great, I don't know if you're a games player at all. If you play, I don't play poker, but this is a poker idea. And it's the idea of levels. I learned it from Magic cards, but it's that when you're playing somebody in a game, there's levels of mastery that you can be at where you need to be very careful not to be too many levels above the person you're playing against, because you may trick yourself into losing. And by that, I mean, let's say that I'm playing poker against you and I'm trying to bluff. Well, if you are an experienced player, then you're going to be able to read the signs of me bluffing in a way where maybe you can tell that I'm bluffing. But if you're completely unexperienced, my ability to bluff you will be destroyed by your inability to read the signals. And so I may try to bluff you and you will call because you don't know anything about the game. Like you're so many layers below my level of expertise that I will play myself. Like I'll fuck myself over. And the idea is you want to just be one level above the person you're playing against at all times. And I think all of those comedians, Andy especially, has that perfect ability to kind of set I'm going to be right here and I want to be just one above you. And I think that's why he's so alienating, and why, Tim Heidecker and Nathan Fielder, all these people can wind up being so alienating, because they wind up being slightly too many levels above where a general audience is watching. But for those who are just one level below them, it's the most exciting entertainment in the world, right?
That's a great metaphor. I mean, I interviewed Stephen Merchant, and he was talking about just this. And he said, with comedy, we're dealing with ourselves and we have a high humor IQ. But our audience often doesn't have a high humor IQ.
This is a perfect comparison. Yeah.
So you can't, he said, go too far up your ass with the knowledge that you have about comedy,
or you create more niche of an audience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's right. And it becomes so. At a certain point, you have to sort of pull back and say, "Listen, I'm an expert at this, but I'm appealing to those out there who are not necessarily, who haven't seen the bootleg video of Tim Heidecker running into a restaurant, who haven't seen Andy Kaufman doing what he was doing." So where does that come in? I mean, the style that you do to create an imperfect look like you do with your films, or to write purposely bad like I try to do, or to look like a bad comedian, there's a skill set that you need to hit it exactly. And if you miss it, the margin of error is very, very slim on this.
You're right, because then you seem like a rank amateur, and it's an amazing. Look, you're bringing up the exact right idea, and I love the sense that you as a comedian are even writing in an imperfect way, because I think about this in two ways. Okay, I had a real epiphany watching YouTube when I was. Maybe it was 2008 or 2009. And what I was noticing is that a lot of the YouTube personalities who were really, really taking off, I noticed so many of them were Europeans who were speaking English as a second language. And their English was great, but it was at a teenage level, right? These were not... and they would admit this too, in their own estimation, these were not sophisticated English speakers in the way that I think a lot of people who were using the medium at the time were trying to, they were speaking, I think, at too many levels above a world audience. And they were drawing in these massive audiences. And it occurred to me that, it is the kind of leveling of their language and the simplicity of the message that they're giving that is somehow inviting people in. And then I heard this great Beckett story about a series of 3 novels that Sam Beckett wrote, that he intentionally wrote in French, even though he was not a French speaker generally. And he wrote them in French and then had them translated into English. He didn't write them in French so that they could be released in French. He wrote them in French so that they could be more direct and more simple. And he would force himself to get the information out in a more in a more direct way. And it's that type of restriction that I think is, one, so brilliantly useful, but also, just gets at the gist of what you're trying to get at in a way that is more accessible. But you also brought up the context in which you present these things, specifically in a filmmaking way. And I, in some ways, stumbled backwards into the notion of like the fake documentary, the student film, the handheld video aesthetic as signaling to an audience, these people don't know what they're doing. And therefore you can approach the work with with less judgment, with a kind of, nothing's going to happen here. These people are not going to, I'm not going to be challenged. And there's a kind of safety in that. That then allows you to challenge them in ways that they'd never expect. I think the whole trick of Nirvana the band, the show, is that we basically make a pact with the audience up front that, don't worry, these idiots will never do anything, and they're not capable of anything at all. And then in Act 3, we go to these places where you're like, how do they do this? It doesn't make any sense. Like if they were capable of this level of showmanship. Why are they filming the show this badly? And I love that. And it's well, you're right to say that this can occur at every single level, including the simplicity of the writing. But that again is this very similar. That's an analogy of telling a lie with a straight face.
That's really fascinating, because by doing it that way, which is one of the reasons I like to write poorly, almost as a character, like when I write a fake novelization to a non-existent movie, the fact that you have that margin of error frees yourself up to get more across. You're not burdened by the pressure of having to perform at a top level. It's almost like Steve Martin not being a good dancer, but if he could imitate a good dancer like he did in Pennies from Heaven, he said it freed him up to dance however he wanted.
It's another great example. And it's so funny. I mean, you know this. I mean, you talk to comedians all the time. But isn't it crazy how so much of the work is fooling yourself into doing it? You know, so much of the work is fooling yourself into thinking, oh, this is possible. And we're talking about them as though they're tools now. But in many ways, and what an audience will never know, is that many of these like distancing effects, you know, writing in this voice, Martin pretending to be this other dancer, me shooting everything as though it's a low stakes documentary, in some ways gives me permission to even approach being a filmmaker, period, because who am I to even pretend that I could make something, right? I need to get over my own my own anxiety to even do the work. And that is like an amazing tool that I found accidentally as a kid that allowed me to even commit anything to film at all, or to act in my own work, right? Because I had such anxiety around that when I was a kid. Horrible. Like I couldn't get out of my voice, etc.
That's a great lesson. And I try to tell that to young students. You can get across you don't have to write short stories for the New Yorker. You can write graphic novels. You can write a first-person performance for the stage. You can write poetry. Whatever you do that you enjoy, that you can use as a Trojan horse to get your ideas and your style through, is just as important as anything else. And the fact, and this is what people don't understand, I think, as young writers or filmmakers, even professionals feel, who am I to do this? And who am I to even attempt to do this? I'm just a kid from Toronto or wherever. But you almost have to trick yourself. And it's such a hard thing to do, to be creative and to work at the top level, that by doing that, by finding tricks that make it easy for yourself, where you can back into it, I think is a very important thing to teach yourself, which I don't think is taught. I certainly know it's not taught in writing schools, and I'm assuming it's probably not taught in film schools as well.
The opposite. It's the opposite. And it's one of my main issues with post-secondary education in the arts generally, which is that it is quite literally an imitation game, where you are right away meant to think that Marshall McLuhan's got this amazing analogy between the amateur and the professional. And the concept is that the professional, the only real difference is that the professional keeps all of their behavior within a bounded box of the rules of the profession, right? And so knowing what those rules are and knowing to be within it and knowing that you cannot leave it is in some ways what creates the identity of the professional versus the amateur. And film schools, in my experience, are so much about trying to define what that professional filmmaker really is and getting you to be in that box, which in my opinion is quite useful in terms of knowing what it is, but they do not tell you that to only be in that box is to fail from the very beginning. Like it's instant failure if you are not also going to bring the amateur identity of who you are into that space. And that is done in exactly the way that you're talking about, which is bring with you an identity of the beginner, the curious, the person who doesn't know what they're doing, who has no clue, and has the humility to admit that in an almost religious way, to approach it with I am nothing, I know nothing, but how can I do something of value? And again, a lot of people are doing this subconsciously without even realizing it, but it's almost, in my opinion, a necessary step, right? To approach like the great glowing magic of affecting the world as a with your eyes lowered, as opposed to going towards it being like, yes, I can do it. And what you learn very quickly as soon as you're around any other professional people is that this is in some ways a universal feeling. And it's like the kind of producers or studio people or complete dilettantes who approach that same glowing light with their eyes open, just like this, like, I'm going to do it. I can do it. No problem. And sometimes those people are very successful, but it is through brashness only. And well, anyway, yeah, I'm quite judgmental of that.
No, I am as well. And I think a part of the problem too is, and I didn't go to graduate school and I barely graduated college, but what I saw with teachers was that they weren't out there hustling. They're teaching a craft that they couldn't do as for a living. And they were teaching me and others what they thought one had to do to achieve. And it wasn't until, I grew up outside DC and Virginia and Maryland. I grew up with Discord Records. Are you familiar with Discord, Fugazi, Minor Threat? And
I know those bands. I didn't know that was the label that they were on.
Yeah, and it started by a kid from DC, Ian Mackay, who it was a very punk aesthetic. I'm going to put out what I want, how I want. And that influenced me more than anything else. The fact that he could just put out records that he felt he didn't have to kowtow to anyone, and he never sold out. That, to me, in the end, is what worked best for me, and is what I try to teach young students. You have to do what you have to do in your own method, and you don't have to follow a career path that is set for you by someone who is out there making a living teaching this craft where they weren't out there hustling themselves. And I think what I see in your film is a very much punk aesthetic, almost like a garage band type of, where you've stuck with your ideas, stuck with your style, and stuck with the people that you've worked with. I'm assuming you've had opportunities to go to big studios, but even up to the last movie, BlackBerry, you see the same people, you see the same style. And that's part of what I love about your work, is that it's so singular, so set for you, and you can see it associated with you so closely, but it's so powerful. And the fact that you've stuck with that and didn't feel that you've had to go mainstream is something I really appreciate.
Well, look, that's just a huge compliment. And again, I don't even know what the reason for that is necessarily. Other than that, I like working in this specific style, and I like working with my friends. And it's interesting, as you told that story about Discord, I had a very similar experience with a graphic novel written by Joe Matt when I was a kid. And it mirrors what you're describing almost exactly, which is that there was a movement in Toronto of autobiographical graphic novels by these three guys in particular, Chester Brown, Seth, and Joe Matt. But really it was spreading quite a bit. This is mid to late 90s. And I came to it afterwards and read this one book, and it's very R. Crumb inspired, like extremely, very American Splendor, but it's basically this guy's life in Toronto and his dating issues. It's an amazing comic. It's called The Poor Bastard. And I read this book when I was, I guess, 16 or 17 years old, and I had the identical experience to what you're describing. It's basically just him writing about the daily problems that he has with his girlfriend, etc. And I was like in tears at the honesty of it and how simple it was, and how this guy was basically just exploring his own life and his own like psychological problems as content. And I thought, I could just do this. Like, there's nothing, he's not doing anything. He's not putting any bows on this. It's just so straight faced, and it's hilarious. And that in many ways defined a lot of my aesthetic. Even though it's a comic book, and that really, if you read, you'd be like, well, this has got nothing to do with any of my films. It's the most influential thing that ever happened to me.
That's interesting. I'm hugely influenced by graphic novels as well, particularly Harvey Pekar. I grew up reading.
Yeah, Pekar is so this guy is basically stealing Pekar's work and presenting it in a late 90s context. So all these guys were basically just ripping off Pekar and R. Crumb directly.
But you once said that real is always funny. So does this relate to that sort of thing, where if it's authentic, where if it's tethered to reality, it doesn't have to be joke. It can be more authentically real, more powerful if it is sort of surrounded by everyday life?
Well, I've come to realize that comedy for me is 100% context driven, and that setting something in the real world can make the most benign behavior, like a look or a sound, that is not, you'd never get a laugh on the page from this in a million years, like like, well, you know what, the perfect example is Glenn Howerton's performance in BlackBerry, which literally got no laughs and was quite alienating on set, right? When we were shooting it, like, that was not funny, and he was not treating it like it was funny, and our plan going into the film was that you're never going for the joke ever, not even once, and he stuck to that in a way that was extremely impressive to me. And then as soon as in the edit, Kurt and I are able to change the context 5 degrees of how people are viewing his behavior, it becomes, for me, one of the funniest performances I've ever seen in my life.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, when he mocks the engineers, what? I mean,
Oh my God.
I thought this guy is working on a level that I haven't seen since Ricky Gervais in The Office.
It's because, look, man, I'm telling you, this stuff was not funny when we were doing it, but we knew. But Glenn and I knew, and it was so hard to cleave to that. We were holding on for dear life, because I think it was a huge risk that we were both taking, where it was like, yeah, I mean, it's a line from the Dirties, but if this backfires, it's going to backfire so hard, you know? And we just worked and worked at that exact thing, at creating these moments where you can't believe this guy is taking this so seriously. Because what I think sometimes I would forget, but then always be reminded of in the edit, is that there are 2 audiences. And the 2 audiences in film are really interesting, because there is you watching it, right? I am like, you know, I'm completely divorced from it. Like, I watch it on a screen and it can't hurt me and I can't affect it. But then there's also the audience inside the film. And so there is an audience inside the film that is also experiencing the story. And so long as Spielberg's, of course, the greatest at this, so long as you pay attention to that audience within your film, your audience can be trained not only how to watch it, like that's sort of the Spielbergian method, but then you can play contextual games where then you say, well, this is how the audience in the film is viewing this, but you don't need to view it this way. You can realize that this whole thing is insane. But the only way that you know it's insane is by seeing an audience taking this seriously inside the movie. And I mean, Wes Anderson is also the king of this, right? Like half of his films are people taking seriously the most ludicrous behavior in the world. Did you see Asteroid City?
No, I haven't seen it yet. What were your thoughts on that?
Worth watching. I'm in some ways an Anderson hater. While I say that out of the other side of my mouth, I say Rushmore and The Grand Budapest Hotel are 2 of my favorite movies ever made.
You know, I wasn't even going to bring this up, but I am a hater as well. But Bottle Rocket, I think, is genius. I love Rushmore. He lost me after that, and I was
I know. Royal Tenenbaums is so nonsense. They're so crazy. Anyway, look, we're gonna get into big trouble if we go down this rabbit hole, because there are people who love this.
But what I don't like about him is the tweeness and the operatic sense, which is what I love about you, because you go the total opposite route. That yours is not controlled. Yours is it is controlled, but in a certain way. It's not manicured. It's not twee. It's not like a doily. And his films, I find, are so precious, whereas yours are, and this is a compliment, messy, open, and realistic, which is why I come to them so strongly.
Well, look, it's going to be very audience defined as to who appreciates that, because, again, that very same aesthetic is going to alienate a lot of people in the same way that it sounds like Anderson's aesthetic has alienated you, right? And in some ways me as well. But I certainly am not going to say that that in some ways that's an error for Anderson to be presenting his films in that way, because it is a coherent worldview that is very personal to him, and I see the truth in it. Truly, it doesn't always work for me at all. But again, I think there's some lines in Grand Budapest Hotel that are some of the funniest things I've ever heard in my entire life. And I think a lot of that comes from him creating this audience apparatus within his films. Grand Budapest, I'm not sure if you saw the film, but it's a great example of this, where Ralph Fiennes is doing this unbelievable performance, and it's being observed constantly by a slightly like stiff upper lip crowd, and Zero, the character who's his lobby boy, is also a really great audience for it. And so I find it much more digestible in that way. It's when he doesn't have that I really fall off. But Asteroid City, it's got it. A lot of great dialogue.
Well, you've called Social Network manicured and controlled and operatic, and that you envision your movie as being the anti-Social Network. Can you talk about that?
Well, sure. I mean, look, it's funny. I mean, that quote may seem like it is more of a directive than really it was. And I'm sure I was saying that in reference to somebody bringing up that film with me, but I mean, I can deal with it all the same. And it's that in all of Fincher's work, you get there's a great video essay on him, isn't there? Where he said the other way of doing things is wrong. Like, he has his aesthetic, and for him to shoot it a different way would be incorrect. And I think that's very true to him, because he takes a very eye of God, this is the only way reality could have been presented way. And it comes from, a history of commercial directing and music video directing and like an aesthetic perfection where there really couldn't be another interpretation of it, like very Kubrickian in that way. And that's something that I just am allergic to as a viewer, because I don't like prescribed, placed stuff. I like it when it feels found. I like it when it feels discovered, and when I can't, when I'm in shock as we go from frame to frame, not at the story, which of course, I mean, all of these stories can be thrilling and shocking, but I mean at the aesthetic. I get swept up in it, and I can't. It creates another feeling, which a Fincher movie, although I love many of those films, love them. I can never feel that way, because it is so controlled. It's like I'm watching it behind glass, right? It can't hurt me. It's very distant, and it's in a box. And it is in some ways, I guess, like more raw cinema, where it's using it's staying in that, well, to go back to this McLuhan, it's definitely staying tightly inside the bounds of the professional box. But I think my role is to be outside of that box as much as possible.
Right. Especially when you talk about product like BlackBerry, which is one of the reasons I love it so much. We're talking about, it's a messy looking film in certain ways, I mean, on purpose, but also the characters. These are not preordained characters to succeed. And the fact that they pull off what they pull off, having seen what they're like and what they do, makes it that much more astonishing that they pull this off. Because to me, they were very human and very singular as these type of engineers. So it wasn't like they were geniuses from the get-go and everything was predetermined. The surprise to me was that these guys were capable of producing something that changed the world like that.
It's I hadn't heard that before, the notion of being preordained, and that really is smart, because it is like that being plucked, It's funny. Yeah, I mean, there is a difference in the movie where it's like the great man who from the very beginning, oh, this person is truly going to be great. Like, oh, this person is going to change the world. This is Alexander the Great, like from birth, destined. Whereas you see these three guys and they're losers in their own way. And I mean like real losers, where we start the film, you can't believe these people are going to be capable of anything, because their flaws are, I would say, the biggest parts of their personalities. And I think I view myself in that way also. In some ways, even in this discussion, it's illuminating to me that in the same way that I'm presenting my work, or that Nirvana the band is couched in a very lo-fi documentary that lets you know up front, well, this is low stakes and these guys are never going to be able to do anything. The personalities of those characters also present that same framing of, don't worry, these guys are clowns and they'll never achieve anything worthy of praise, let alone something that changes society. And it's just dawning on me that in this film, some of that contextual framing goes all the way down even to the character level on these guys.
But that's the thing. I mean, nothing is predestined. There was the fact that the Beatles made it, they could have very easily have not made it. And you talked about Jeff Bezos, an idea which I thought was absolutely brilliant, showing him putting together Amazon. And the
I
fact
think this would
that,
be an amazing film. Yeah,
amazing.
You're talking. Yeah, I think this would be an amazing film. I think it would be like the 8 Mile of like the .com like billionaire
I
movement.
love
And
this idea.
so do I. I think somebody's got to do it because if you watch there's a really, really great piece of footage on YouTube of Bezos, I think in 99, this is before the .com crash, where he's driving around in this really piece of shit car, just hustling. I think he still has a little bit of his hair and he's looking, bloated. Like he is not the T1000 that he's become. And there is a kind of, you root for him is basically what I'm getting at. You root for him in a way that now you could never, right? Like now he's essentially Lex Luthor, but to watch this movie of like what he was like when he's trying to put the beginnings of this architecture together, like I think that could be so great.
I mean, the fact that he's driving to post offices himself, standing in line.
Right.
I mean, to me but it shows you how human it all is, where nothing is written in the stars. This guy could very easily have given up. This guy very easily could have done something else, but he was us at a certain time, and he was doing this. And for whatever reason, I guess for many reasons, he succeeded. But the thought of a young Bezos, like a young Abraham Lincoln or a young Ben Franklin, I think is absolutely a wonderful idea for a film.
When they themselves don't know. I love that too, is the person who does not understand the impact that they're going to have on the world. And they're dealing with all the same type of crippling self-doubt demons that are haunting everybody.
I want to talk about the influence. You mentioned GovWorks, which is one of my favorite documentaries. Can we talk about that? I'm always suggesting people see this movie because it really is of a certain time and place, but it also remains true today, where you have these people who are dreaming of a certain thing and pushing forward on it. And one person was prescient enough to say, you know what, I'm out of here. This is not going to work. Which I always wondered what happened to that guy, by the way, and how much he sold out for. But GovWorks was about this early app or early website that you could
what? You actually have the title switched. The film is called startup.com. Their company is called GovWorks.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But everything you've said has been completely correct. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because I realized
true,
you were about to realize that the name of the website is GovWorks.
Is GovWorks. Yeah, which was not a bad idea. You could pay parking tickets and do other things on it. But can you talk about how that film influenced you when it came to creating BlackBerry?
Absolutely. And it's that it was the perfect example for us. One, the period is perfect. So if you've never seen this documentary, it is a for-real documentary about early days in the .com boom, which if you didn't live through it was essentially everything was going online and there was billions and billions and billions in venture capital all pouring into this space. And if you just had an idea for a website, you could become an overnight success. And this was a documentary charting one small company whose vision was, we're going to allow you to pay parking tickets online. And that was essentially their whole, which now people do all the time, but imagine this being a revolutionary idea. And why it was important is that it was literally what we were trying to do in terms of our aesthetic. What does it look like when you have a camera with a bunch of, post-grad college age guys in a room they're solving a software problem, not a hardware problem. But what does that feel like? What does it feel like when all of a sudden it seems like they're going to get money? I'm a huge fan of the documentary Overnight. I'm not sure if you've seen this film.
It's one of my favorites.
Yeah. It's a masterpiece. And it is the most perfect cautionary tale of what you do not ever want to become. And I was seeing so many flashes of Overnight in startup.com, where you see the power differentials begin to hierarchize, whatever it is. You see the gap between the people in charge and those who are just kind of along for the ride start to grow and grow and grow, and the culture change. And how the cameras then change, how they shoot the people, how the interviews change. It was that and The War Room, the Penny Baker movie, were both, it was about the Clinton campaign in the 90s, were both aesthetically huge influences, but then story-wise also what happens when you've got an underdog in Act 1 that then becomes the market leader in Act 3. And how does that change how you shoot them? How does that change how the actors behave when they're on camera, et cetera? Like there's all of these like subconscious cues that we get from those documentaries that I think they are perfectly invisible, but if you notice them, they're really, really interesting, right? Bill Clinton at the end of the War Room is behaving very differently than he is at the beginning, because it's like, okay, this guy's going to become the president, and that is a very different situation than let's all have fun. I am what is it, man of the people, like I'm here giving like the let's get up and go speeches to everybody, and yeah, going
Well,
on
that's
to become
fascinating. And I'm wondering if that affects you now. I mean, does that extend into your life where you're now successful and can do various things? Can you go out on the street anymore? When you have money, when you have the freedom to do what you can do, can you shoot, certainly not in a high school anymore, but even in the streets, and be as punk and be as guerrilla as you used to be?
Yeah, it's something that already I'm starting to see in Toronto. There, like this, it's something is slightly different, but I always fall back because I'd heard this so much about Sacha Baron Cohen, right? Like, and I'd heard even the refrain from him that, "Oh, I can't shoot that show anymore because everybody knows who I am," and I feel like at some level that is not true. And I've shot enough in this city specifically to know that like any level of notoriety is not going to penetrate every single corner of a urban city, because there just are not enough people interested in work generally. It just is not possible. I believe that Barack Obama could shoot a hidden camera television show, right? In Washington, D.C., if he went to the right places, and I think that you're actually accorded new tools if you're forced to go into these smaller and more obscure places, right? I reject. Maybe you'll have some trouble sometimes, and certain things that you try to shoot will be blown up because of it. But I think that nothing could stop me from being able to shoot in public.
Well, could that be a positive, to have new rules, to have restrictions that you didn't have before, to work within that realm?
100%. 100%. And I think that the tyranny of the blank page is one of the, getting back to the ideas of restrictions on artists, is one of the worst. And the fact that people are, it will just take me for an example, that I would be funneled through a smaller and smaller and smaller hole that is in some ways of my own design, is nothing but useful. I'll give you an example. We're making a Nirvana the Band movie right now. And in order to evade some of this idea of, oh, if we just go shoot on Queen Street in Toronto, are we going to be able to get anything done? We're changing the context of the movie so now it's a road movie. And these guys, I won't give too much away, but they basically take an RV and drive it all across the continental United States. In some ways, it's recreating many of the. I can't spoil this stuff, but I'll say a big reference is the book Confederacy of Dunces.
Oh, my favorite book.
Is that really your favorite book?
Well, I used to live in New Orleans, and I went to Tulane, and I actually would go through his papers at the Tulane Library. Tools papers.
Come on! Oh well, hey, look. I'm a massive fan. Fan.
A friend of mine bought the rights to The Butterfly of the Typewriter and wants to shoot that movie about Tool's very sad life, but he's an expert on Tool. I mean, last time I went down to New Orleans, he brought me to one of the houses that Tool grew up in the Marigny section of New Orleans. I know the house.
We're shooting a scene of the film right outside that house.
Really, because of the reference to the fact it was John.
Well, you know what? Since you know the original work, I'll say that our RV, we get off of a houseboat on the Mississippi River, crash into the same building that Mrs. O'Reilly crashes into, and in order to make money, in order to repair the RV, I get a job as a hot dog vendor.
Oh, that's perfect. Are there hot dog vendors down there? Because when I left,
Lucky's still around.
Lucky hot dogs.
Lucky's still around. And Lucky is the same. So Tool analogized Lucky in the I forget the name of the company that Ignatius works for, but Lucky is the same.
Yeah, I used to see that on in the French Quarter, those, and every time I would see it, I would just think of Ignatius Riley. I mean, it was such, and now they sort of play it up. I mean, it's part of the story of New Orleans, where you would even have an Ignatius Riley statue, which you never would have had years ago, because in a lot of ways, he's an incredibly accurate portrayal of New Orleans, but it's not always positive.
No, of course, dude. He's like one of the most hateable protagonists of all time. But it's like every word that comes out of my mouth, I can't help but smile. Like I love him.
It was such a prescient book. I mean, it really sort of
He's the original troll. He's the
Exactly.
original troll. He's
That's
a
right.
fucking genius, man.
total fucking genius, and the converse and the dialogue in that book is like nothing I've ever read. It's just incredible.
Well, even today, and you know what? It's funny because there are some flights of fancy in the book that it's so interesting that you'd be such an Anderson hater and have that as your favorite book because I thought about this. It is some of that stuff is so elevated. This is so getting back to audience. It's so amazing that so much of what is incredible about Ignatius's journey is that it is being viewed by people who in the book are like, this guy's out of his fucking mind, but they don't say anything to him. Nobody tries to stop him, but it's the moments with the Levi patriarch and his crazy wife running around with that secretary. There's like when other characters in the book are very, very elevated and on that same kind of magic level that I'm like, this is ridiculous. I can't get behind that. Do you remember at the end when he sincerely believes, when Levi believes that he sincerely is going to be sued for $500,000 because of that one letter that Ignatius wrote? I'm like, what? What are you talking about? You're deluded. Like, why? And then for them to hang the stakes of the end of the book on that, but this is not taking away from it. Like, it is a masterpiece. I love it. It's hugely influential on me. But some of it is quite antic. Like, it's
Right, and that's why
it's so elevated.
And that's why it was rejected by Charles Gottlieb, I think was the editor's name in New York, because it had that craziness to it, the madness to it that we love now, but at that time didn't really make a lot of sense within.
Well, it didn't seem like literature. Yeah.
No, it didn't. But we look at it now and it's just so prescient and so brilliant. Are you headed back to New Orleans? I can set you up with the two.
We're shooting a huge section of the movie in New Orleans. Literally.
Okay, because you have to tell me when
that's where our RV breakdown. We're thinking August. It would be so great to get to because we don't know anybody there. My cinematographer's there right now.
I'll set you up.
Around. Yeah, that would be hugely helpful.
Yeah, and my friend David Dubose lives down there, and he still wants to make Butterfly, but he's an expert on that world, and I think he'd be a great guy to meet.
Well, he probably is going to know things that I obviously could never know. Like, so I basically just want to get everything right. Like, I want to do these nods to the book in ways that, you'd never know if you never read it and you watch the movie, you'd have no clue. Like what the hell do you care? Like, you have no idea that this is a Confederacy reference. But
I will say this: New Orleans is very, very difficult to capture, and you need a local to take you through it because most movies that I've seen, that even Treme, I didn't think captured the real New Orleans. But if you want to capture the real New Orleans, you have to be led by locals, and there are a few down there that I would recommend because they just know the city. It's a very complicated, very bizarre city, unlike any other in the world. And when you see a movie like the Robert De Niro one, where he played Louis Cypher, I'm forgetting the name of the movie, Blackheart or Angel Heart. I saw that in New Orleans, and people were throwing shit at the screen because they were so pissed off. But it's an amazing city, but if you don't capture it just right, people do get upset down there.
They get you.
They get you. I want to ask you about their first movie, which I absolutely love. I have two questions about that. Is it true that nothing of the Dirties was scripted except for the very last line?
Yeah, that is true. But it's funny, at the time, it's not like we thought that was any kind of achievement. It was just so much easier. It's impossible to write dialogue when you're going to be dealing with real people all the time. And so we just never even thought about writing dialogue, not even once. And it was so much more fun to come up with things as we shot them. But the last line, like that came to me just a few weeks before we shot it. And I thought, this really sums it up for this guy.
Well, I was just astounded. I mean, the hardest thing I think to write dialogue-wise is dialogue among very good friends. And it was so natural in that movie among you and your friends that if it had been written, I would have been very impressed. But the fact that it was all off the cuff, I find very impressive as well. It was just the fact that you could talk that realistically to each other and make it sound unscripted and not as fake as a lot of high school movies are.
One of the tricks that I learned making the web series of Nirvana the band is that if you shoot two cameras at the exact same time, when a conversation does dip into the kind of staid or the boring or the tautological, which is really the problem when you're improvising, you can just cut all that stuff out.
But did you have that at the Dirties?
We shot two cameras. Oh yeah, we shot the whole movie two cameras. Yeah.
Now, is it true that you enrolled in a high school in order to shoot these scenes?
That's slightly apocryphal because enrolled, definitely, like we did not add our names to the ledger, like our names weren't on the attendance. But yes, we did enter those schools as students. Just
How? How did you do
different
that?
schools were different. So sometimes we would have like a member of the crew would know some teachers there, and they would be like, "Hey, my friends are going to come join a few classes. Is that okay with you?" And they would be like, "Yeah, of course. Yeah, we don't care." And this is like small town Ontario, so that was not an issue. So we would just be in classes for sometimes as long as a week, just going in between classes, like moving around. Like a lot of this is in the film, like us in that gym class, us in. I think there's some stuff of us in a biology class that's in the film, but we shot a lot more than we used. Right, a lot of that time was us getting used to the students getting used to us, because we were, I guess, I was 24 or something when we were shooting that, and or maybe 25, and to get other students thinking that, oh, we were just students, took a little while.
Yeah, I would think so.
Just because we needed to like be there for a while. But yes, that's I would say that's half true.
So you were enrolled in the school, but you wouldn't go to classes. You would just roam the hallways and shoot?
Yeah, and sometimes we just stay in classes, Owen and I. The real trick was we would only be able to get away with this for like 2 or 3 days before people would start to say, like, "Why are you guys always on camera?" Or there was a scene in the film early on where a teacher came up to us after a guy had come up and like kind of fought me, like had kind of like given me attitude, or maybe he was yelling at me. And a teacher came up and said, "I just want you guys to know that there are some students secretly filming you right now." And and that would happen enough that then we'd be like,
great.
okay, like we can't do this anymore. We need to go move to a different school. I think in total we probably shot at 5 different schools in that movie, 4 or 5.
So at that point, they were shooting a movie. So it almost becomes like symbio psycho taxiplasm. Have you ever seen
another
that
favorite of
documentary?
mine? Yeah, another favorite.
Incredible. So many layers. Could you get in trouble for doing what you did by lying and saying you were not 24 and you were only there to shoot? I know in America now you could not get away with that.
Yeah, it was a different time. Like we were shooting that movie in 2011, and I don't know. Again, this gets back to the beginner mindset. Like maybe, but we were coming by it so honestly that even if things were to get escalated right to the top and they're like, "Oh, you're not supposed to be here. We're calling the cops." And then the cops show up and they're like getting us to explain what we're doing. And we like show them the footage. Like I think that there was an innocence to what we were doing that maybe would have justified it. I don't know. I'm a big ends justify the means filmmaker, where I think like, look, whatever you have to do in order to get this, you may as well do it, because otherwise you're not getting it. And so long as you sincerely believe that what you're doing has value and will help people in the aggregate, right? Like if you really think working your hardest on this movie or play or article or whatever it is you're doing actually is going to be a net positive for the planet, I think you can justify a lot in order to get that as good as you can. That's a dangerous philosophy.
No, I don't think it is, at least in my last question. Advice for those who are coming up, and I think you just gave a great piece of advice. In the end, if you wait for permission to make it, or to make a product, or to become successful, you're going to be waiting a long time. I think really you have to do what you need to do and go out there and make it happen. And it seems like that's been the case with you. You went out there and you did it. You hustled. And I know that Stephen King's On Writing is one of your favorite books. It's one of my favorite books of advice too. Can you give me some advice to the listeners out there who are young filmmakers, or even just older filmmakers who want to succeed a little more? What would you say that they should do, and what would you recommend they don't do?
The first thing I'll say is that audiences will forgive aesthetics first. so long as there is something meaningful inside it. And that I think people get way too wrapped up in the technical side of being a filmmaker and spend 1/100th of the amount of energy on like, what is it that you're actually trying to do with the medium? Like, what story are you trying to tell? Who are you? This is a much more important question than how are you going to present that? Where are you going to put the camera? What camera are you going to use? Audiences generally are like, well, look, people will watch YouTube videos shot on a phone that with no sound, that are like blurry crap, and then be enthralled, right? There's some of these videos that have completely changed the world, and you're sitting around waiting for perfect conditions in terms of your production model. This is insane. You said people are oftentimes people will wait until they get permission. I always say that they're waiting for perfect conditions, and that this is a huge type 1 error. You can't wait for perfect conditions, because they literally will never come. And that great quote by that car manufacturing CEO, I don't remember what it was. He was designing some new car in the 80s, and he said, "We're going to jump off the cliff and build our parachute on the way down." And that is the definitive quote about what being a filmmaker is. You need to just start. You have to begin, because otherwise if you're any good, you're going to be so, you're going to be so interested in investigating yourself that you could do that forever, and you will. So stop thinking about the one movie as being your opus, your masterpiece, and this needing to be perfect and perfectly represent you, and take that one piece of work and put it out there, and recognize that the thing you're actually developing, your masterpiece, is going to be you, the maker. And so let the film that you make now be a flawed thing. Let it be imperfect, and let it be a tool that works on you, so that you, the maker, can then make another better film, and then another better film, and that you yourself are the work of art that you're working on, not some individual piece that's going to represent you forever, because that is a paralyzing idea.
That's absolutely. It's a form of creative block. And I've seen people who are like, they're circling the drain for 10 years trying to create the perfect object. It doesn't exist. You need to pull the trigger and move on down that path.
You have to. And I would say 10 years, I've seen the exact same thing. I've seen filmmakers working on the same project for 10 years. And you look, and what's so bad is that the longer you spend on that one project, the higher the stakes on it are, because you've already sunk so much time into it. So now it has to be good. It has to be amazing. And Wonder Boys is a film that I think does this so well, where you see Michael Douglas, who has been struggling with his second book. His first book was a masterpiece. It's now 1,000 pages. He won't let anybody read it. And it's so specific. He only has one copy, and he's protecting it with his life. And Robert Downey Jr., his agent, is coming, just trying to read some of it and get him to finish it. And at the end of the movie, the book is lost, swept up in the wind. And it's like the greatest thing that ever could have happened to him. It like begins his life. And there's great meaning in that. But
what you said was the first piece of advice too was absolutely terrific. The movies, the comedies that last are the imperfect ones, whether it's Laurel and Hardy or even Meatballs, these movies that are imperfect, but where the characters are so strong.
Exactly.
And you love them. When you see a movie like Catch-22, which is gorgeously shot, when it's too perfect, and I was actually interviewing Buck Henry about this, his problem with Catch-22, he said, was that it was too beautiful, that because of the sunsets, because of this, because of that, it took your mind away from the characters and the comedy. Whereas in Laurel and Hardy, which is shot like shit, you focus directly on character. So that, what you said, I think is a fantastic piece of advice. There's no perfection, and trying to achieve it will literally ruin your life. You have to keep moving. You cannot stagnate. You have to keep moving down that path.
Well, you can actually achieve something greater than perfection, which is a Michel Gondry line that he says while they're making the film Block Party with Dave Chappelle. All the musicians are together and they're unrehearsed and they're on a conference call, and Questlove is on the other side of the phone And he makes the point, well, you know what? It's not going to be perfect because we really don't have enough time to rehearse. And then Michel Gondry says, yeah, but we're going to create something better than perfect because it will be so unrehearsed and it will be so of the moment that it will be better than it would have been had we had the requisite time to do it right. And it takes us back to the original framing of this interview, which is that by putting contextual barriers around your work and making it seem like it's amateur, making it seem like it's inoffensive, and I mean offensive in the aesthetic way. Actually, I mean offensive in the aesthetic way. Sorry. You wind up creating a different viewing experience than you would if you had the $100 million budget and the best crew and the best everything. It is a way of, I learned this from programming. There's a way of turning your bugs into features. And if you're broke, and if you have nothing, and if you've never done this before, and if you have no idea what you're doing, that actually can be a huge advantage if you pivot into it, right? Your bug can be a feature.
That's fascinating. I mean, the Dirties cost $10,000, BlackBerry cost $5 million, the Social Network cost $45 million. This was 10 years ago. What you're doing and how you're doing it is, I just find fascinating. It means a lot to me. You're one of my favorite filmmakers out there. I thank you for your time. I look forward to what you have coming up. And I want to give you some New Orleans advice. So when we stop recording, I'll talk to you about that. But thank you so much for your time. I know you have plenty of other things to be doing, but keep up the great work. You are on the right path. It's just great to watch.
I so appreciate it, Mike. You're a kindred spirit. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt. That's it for this episode of Doing It with Mike Sachs. I wonder what Judge John Hodgman is now doing. Maybe splashing in an ironic above-ground pool? I'd like to thank you for listening. I sincerely appreciate it. I'd like to thank Sonar for giving me this opportunity. And I'd like to thank the following people for helping me to make this episode. Rob Schulte, the world's best producer. Merrill Markoe for her amazing work and for being a great friend. Matthew Johnson for giving me his time, especially in light of my fucking inability to do anything when it comes to technical matters. So, until next episode, keep your feet on the ground and keep reaching for my junk, Jack.
Did you ever take a dump made you feel like you just slept for 12 hours?
During the strip search, they found this grandma tar in my cooch. You like tar?